Thank you, Chairman Boyle and committee. My name is Darmoon, and I'm here to talk about the Wapiti Fire and a little bit about really the real cause of all of these. I have a PowerPoint if you want to bring it up. But the Wapiti Fire in the Stanley Basin really started 50 years ago. The things that have brought destruction to Idaho and Idaho's forests happened a long, long time ago. I was fortunate as a young man, as a young child actually. My father purchased the Rod and Gun Club in Stanley in 1961. So I have a long perspective of what our environment was in those days. We never suffered fire. We never suffered smoke. And all through my childhood, through the 70s and into the 80s, we really did have a pristine and beautiful environment. But that has been forever changed by the recklessness and the mismanagement of our federal Forest Service and BLM. There is a policy that has changed, and it's changed the way our federal forests operate. And it's very different than what happens here on state lands. And thank you, our state director, for saving Idaho's lands. But this is really on the federal territory where we have serious issues. With this long perspective, I have seen how loggers were run out of the area. Every little rural community in Idaho had a little logging operation, a small sawmill that made the community whole. It brought economy. It made a thriving community. Small and rural as we were, Stanley had loggers and miners and ranchers, and that was the resource base and the economic base. Of course, there was some tourism, there were hunters, but really, our economy was based on resources, and resources that are now out of touch. Resources, though, that were mandated by Congress in the 1960 Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act to carry on with. And I must say, in these days, most of our families had members in the Forest Service who did a fantastic job. And we were all very proud of the work they did to protect our forest, to make our economies whole, and to keep our environment free of fire. But that is no longer the case, and hasn't been the case for the last 50 years when things changed on the federal forests. So I'm a geological engineer by degree from the University of Idaho School of Mines, which now no longer exists. I'm a professional civil engineer and land surveyor, and I live up the Yankee Fork on land that we patented on a mining claim in 1983. And at that time, there were many small miners. You don't mention that you're a miner in polite company these days because they were run off first. Idaho has great resources, great strategic mineral resources that this country must have. The cobalt is one of them. Here recently, China just sanctioned the United States on antimony, and so Perpetua's stibnite mine is hopefully going to be able to fill that gap, of which we are completely dependent on foreign sources. So, you know, the miners were kind of the first to go. It all began in the 70s in an era where everybody was raptured by this environmental movement. They were on a Rocky Mountain high, and everybody sang Kumbaya around a campfire. And at that moment, America changed, and we became emotionally attached to this environment. And the environment really has become the victim of this emotional entrapment. So here's some of our property. We're milling what we can. We're not even an operator. We just mill for our own personal use. But there are no mills anymore. They've run us out of Custer County. So our traditional ways of life are gone. It's been very difficult for the loggers. Well, and there's no mills. In fact, I believe that Representative Boyle and my wife were working on a project with the University of Idaho to bring a large logging operation or a mill to Salmon. You know, but that the administration changed and it died right on the vine. So our federal government is a bad neighbor to those of us who live in rural Idaho. Our lands are completely surrounded by the federal estate, by the federal territories, and they're not here to help us. They're not here to mandate their original goals of the Forest Service. And now, of course, cattlemen, the ranchers out there, they're the next big victim. And while they're very interested in measuring stubble height to see how many AUMs they can support, they don't realize that those cattle munch the grass down that prevents that fire from starting, ending up in the forest. So we have an upside down management problem, and it's not going to be fixed unless people stand and demand a change from Congress. But that's very difficult. It's very unlikely for Idaho because people in Arkansas have more to say about what happens in our national forests than we in Idaho do because they have greater representation in Congress. This just is not right. So here it is, the Wapiti fire. This is the fire coming over from Grand Jean. My son and I were traveling to Boise the day it started, June 24th. It was 2 acres. They'd blocked the road to Grand Jean. They had a Forest Service truck there. But they would not put it out. I don't know why. I suspect they figured that, you know, this is scrub timber. We need to burn it out because there's been no management. The problem has been seeded years ago when FLIPMA came in 1976. It essentially began the process of preservation of our forests in this wild and scenic idea, and to lock away our forests in wilderness and the SNRA and such as that. Well, it's been counterproductive because the beetles got in and killed a bunch. There's a lot of standing dead, and it's only going to burn. And right now, that's how they manage fire, by incineration. It's true. This fire wouldn't have happened had they logged that timber, had they kept the access roads open, had they let our community thrive with loggers and small mining or small timber operations, small millers. There's none of us left. They're all gone. This is a picture of the ITD station just west of Stanley. There's the fire coming in. My son lives here. He works for ITD. He's a volunteer fireman also. You know, it's kind of crazy, I guess, how hypocritical the whole deal is. Here we are trying to save our environment, and on one hand, we're burning it down because somehow we have forgotten how to manage our forests. And that's really what rubs a lot of people in the rural area, because they did have family who worked in the Forest Service who were damn good foresters. And here it is coming over the ridge into the Stanley Basin. Fortunately for Stanley, most of the fire is south of Highway 21 and west of Stanley. But Stanley Lake will never be the same, and a good portion of our pristine environment will never come back for 100 years. This is some of the tragedy of fire. This is the lava fire. I have a site, a private site on Facebook called Idaho on Fire, and one of our members sent this in. This is some of the cattle that her father manages. You see, it's not just the trees, it's somebody's cattle. I know these are hard to see. I'm going to go through a few more of these, and here it is, died right in the creek bed. her dad walked up the lowlands after the fire and took a few of these pictures, and so I'm going to warn you, they're not really great, but here's one of our deer. This is our deer. This is state of the Idaho critters. You know, our forest managers don't seem to care about them very much. There's a bear. There's a couple of bears that he took pictures of. It's hard to see, but you have to see it because it's real. And it's our wildlife, up in smoke. So coming back yesterday from Stanley, driving here, this is the west end, just right at the pass there at Banner Summit. And it's going to be dead like this, standing. There'll be new trees come in, but they'll be standing dead, and it'll stand there until it blows over in about 10 years and just make a jungle of deadfall. And of course, you know, back in the day in Stanley, there were logging roads all over the place. They're all plowed up, so you can't even fight a fire. It used to be, when I was a kid, I remember, everybody was required to have a bucket, a shovel, and a Pulaski or an axe in your car because you could be conscripted to fight a fire if you were on the road and there was a fire. There was a very proactive attempt to fight fire when they first started. In fact, the fire was supposed to be out by 10 o'clock the next morning. Here's some more smoldering along the road on the way over here. Anyway, I guess we forgot about Smokey. You don't hear about him very much. People don't seem to care. It amazes me how environmentalists aren't jumping up and down about this. But the story is a lot deeper than just the forest, and I think we're all getting a picture of that. But beyond the critters that are dying, our people are at risk. Our economies are at risk. And our Western way of life is ending because of this. Because we have a very bad neighbor that really does not care. So this is from Evergreen Magazine. It's a typical fire map of the West. This was from 22. It just shows how the entire West is burning. We are not states on equal footing with the rest of the states. Most of the West is managed by the BLM and the Forest Service. And states don't have a lot to say about what happens. This is a graphic also from Evergreen Magazine. It shows the billion board feet of lumber production versus the millions of acres burned. And you can see about 1989 is about when things started tipping over. That was the last real great timber production from federal forests. It took a few years for those forests to get gnarly, deadfall, overgrowth, and then the fires start. And the fires have been on a rise for a very long time. It's because we don't have people in the forest managing it. We don't have people out there logging that valuable timber to make this America a little stronger. The carbon that they want to get rid of is you. The carbon that they want to get rid of is our people who live in the rural areas. This man, you may not have heard of him. It's Ferdinand Silcox. He was the forest chief appointed in 1933. He's the man that proactively took the forest and made it strong by fighting fire. He's the man that said, we will have the fires out by 10 o'clock the next morning. I didn't even know if we still have smoke jumpers, but he started that. Here's a couple of things that I think say a lot. It was Silcox who in 1935 instituted the 10 a.m. fire policy. It was dropped in 1978, a year after President Carter signed the National Forest Management Act. It says a lot right there. These old guys, they knew how to fight fire, and they fought it. And it is dangerous. But everything we do in life is a little bit dangerous. Here again, the idea, the Forest Service was to secure wise use of our natural resources as sources of raw materials, of necessity of life, and of employment and income. These resources are fundamental to our national defense against military aggression and against the undermining of economic and social structures within our borders. Man, that sounds pretty familiar for where we stand today. It's interesting that we've neglected our resources on all fronts. And Idaho is a resource state. It was mining that brought Idaho settlement. And we have rich, strategic, and very valuable ores. Okay, so it's just a chart. It shows the population growth in Idaho. You can see about 1990, it really takes off. Everybody wants to come to Idaho because it's a beautiful place, and it truly is. And we have a wonderful way of life here. But it's changing. And as Idaho grows, our rural counties are dying. I'm from Custer County. I'll explain this graph a little bit. So here's what happened in the 2010 census. Idaho had a population of 1.57 million. In the 2020 census, we had 1.839 million, a growth of 17%. In Custer County, in the same time, we lost 2%. Why is that? Custer County is a beautiful county. You love the mountains. Only 3% of Custer County is private. 94% is federal, and their balance is state land. And what has happened to people in Custer County is that they can't use their traditional sources of income: logging, grazing, and mining. They're all gone for the most part. Few ranchers still hanging on. And what that means is that kids cannot come home. Your children cannot come home and take over, or they won't. Why in the world would somebody want to be a rancher today out on the range trying to deal with the Forest Service and BLM? And as a consequence, our population is dropping. The average median age in Idaho is 37.8. The average median age in Custer County is 55.5. There's nothing but the dead and dying left. And it's only going to get worse. Let's contrast that to Madison County, the youngest median population, 21.6. Pretty amazing. Well, it's not just Custer County that is suffering. Here's the top 10 counties. Custer County at 55.5. Adams County, I believe our Commissioner Purdy is here, 54.4. Boise County, a county that had beautiful timber that's burned every year. The Pioneer Fire several years ago burnt 300,000 acres of beautiful yellow pine. 53.7. Lemhi County, our sister to the north county, 53.2. You see, rural Idaho is dying on the vine. And it's all because we have a federal master that is a bad neighbor. Okay, so what can we do about it? What can you as a Federalism Committee do about it? You have a lot more power, I think, than you realize. This is the 1897 Organic Act that made the forest, the national forest. It was the authorization to establish these forest reserves to improve and protect the condition of forested areas in the United States and to furnish a continuous supply of timber for the use and necessities of the people of the United States. That's pretty interesting. Does this scroll up a little bit? I want to talk a little bit also about, there we go, the jurisdiction. Nope, one more up. I guess it doesn't say. Anyway, up one. Maybe I can bring it back. Oops, here we go. Anyway, it says the jurisdiction, both civil and criminal, over persons within such reservations shall not be affected or changed by reason of the existence of such reservations, except as for punishment or offenses against the United States. It goes on to say that the state wherein the reservation is made, the state has jurisdiction. That has not changed. The state has jurisdiction over these lands. The problem is that jurisdiction brought private rights to the forest. That means the state rights and people had private rights. And they were there to increase production of the forest. The 1960 Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act reinforced that, and even the 1974 Planning Act. But then comes 1976, known as FLIPMA, the National Forest Management Act. And here, this is the seeds that sowed the Wapiti fire, the Paddock fire, the Lava fire, the Boulder fire, all the fires, because the Forest Service made it more important to study everything. All the birds, all the bunnies, they all had equal value, all the different kinds of trees. I have a mining operation plan on a mountain up the Yankee Fork, and I had to forfeit part of it because I've got 2 whitebark pine on the tree, and the whitebark pine is endangered, and they're just little seedlings, but you know, everything that they can do to shut down a mining operation, a forest logging operation, or ranching operations, they do, because all the wildlife, all the little critters, all that are equally studied and funded. And so it's just a mess of bureaucratic taking. And essentially that's what it is. They're taking people's rights. They're taking the rights of citizens that have lived in these rural counties forever. Now, this is a sign that I have a group called Idaho on Fire. It's a private Facebook group. We have over 3,500 members. We started it in 2018. This was a billboard that we put up. A lot of people spread it all through rural Idaho. You might know it. But it's really true. Environmentalists, you own this fire. It was all of these happy ideas that sprouted in the 1970s that have now burnt our forest to a crisp, and our precious animals and our economies, our very Western way of life. I encourage you to join this. Some of you are. You'll see some of those pictures I've shown. I want to end with this. This is a very emotional picture, I think. It tells a lot right here. This is something maybe Norman Rockwell would have painted about. But here we have a cowboy. I know this, the daughter of this cowboy, she reached out to me and sent me this picture. Her name's Trinity Hess. And this is her dad out there. These cattle were caught up behind a fence, and he went out there and he's running cattle. This is the lava fire, by the way. And he's running them out, and there's that fire coming right behind him. I think you need to look at that and think about that. That's a man out there trying to save these cattle, risking his life to do it, but that's his economy. And there's still people like that out there. There's still people out there willing to brave these kinds of things. The fact of the matter is, he shouldn't have to. The fact of the matter is, we should protect these people, these ranchers. Yeah, and this is a very sad story, but in some ways very inspiring to know that there are people out there. He's kind of like the last of the Mohicans right now. And I think we need to change the way we've thought about the way we manage fires. I think the state must begin to insist that our federal partners, as we call them, become better neighbors and work together to protect the resources, the people of Idaho, their economies and way of life. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Dar. Do we have any questions or comments to make here? Representative Horman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think everyone here knows I was probably the least educated on natural resources when I got on this committee. Was put on here for other subject matter expertise. But I want to say thank you to you and to Mark and to Lance. These firsthand accounts, combined with what I've learned in previous meetings, you've done an excellent job at building these agendas to have taught me a lot about Idaho's natural resources and critical minerals and land management. They are so critical, I think, to the work that we do in preserving the Idaho way of life. And these firsthand accounts, Madam Chair, have just been invaluable to understand some history, understand the experiences. I mean, a lot of us remember where we were on 9/11, or if you're a little older, maybe it's JFK or something like that. I've noticed that each of you have dates off the top of your head, because as much as we do the Idaho way of managing what happens and pressing forward anyway, they're very traumatic experiences. You're defending land that's been in your families for generations, and you take it in stride. But I think it's very helpful for people like me who, just spent a little time on my uncle's ranch in Cary growing up, to get the firsthand impact to you, to the wildlife, to the environment, to our forests and to our land, to our water. And so I just want to thank you and Mark and Lance for making time to come here today and help teach us from your perspective, so that as we, as policymakers, make budget decisions, make policy decisions that impacts you, it just gives me a much better understanding of why people are so angry at the federal government right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
That said it all.
All right then.
Okay, do we have any other questions, or we'll be adjourned? And thank you, Dar, very much. We'll be back at 1:30.
So.
You're watching Committee Room EW42. Hardware and closed captioning for Idaho in Session is provided by the Idaho Legislature and Idaho Legislative Services Office. Additional funding is provided by the Idaho Public Television Endowment. You're watching Committee Room EW42. Hardware and closed captioning for Idaho in Session is provided by the Idaho Legislature and Idaho Legislative Services Office. Additional funding is provided by the Idaho Public Television Endowment. You're watching Committee Room EW42. Hardware